Hello. Hopefully all the audio and everything is working. My name is Rory, and this is Fireside Fairytales, and tonight we're going to be reading some Slavic folktales where tricksters or underhanded folk meet terrible fates is really the theme of these two stories that we're going to look at. I see GS is early in the chat as per usual. Good evening, GS. It's always good to see you. So what is this? Well, this is the Varietal literature. We're a group of Vancouver writers based in Vancouver, kind of a writer's commune. And we post up stories, we write stories, we're all published, but also sometimes we just like reading stories, and me in particular, I like reading fairy tales online here, and that's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to read you some fairy tales. If you've never seen it before, welcome. If you have, welcome back to the cabin. And tonight we are again looking at Slavic. I call them fairy tales. They're kind of folk tales. There's magic in them. Not exactly fairies, though. In terms of, like, Slavic is Ukrainian, but it's also spread out quite a bit as to what it is as a cultural group. If you're not familiar, I was doing some reading about it today. So, I mean, there's areas where you would sort of expect it and recognize it, but it's a distinct cultural group that's further spread than that, including Russia and North America and so on. The stories tonight are coming from a gentleman named Alexandra, who was an ambassador in Iran, I believe, and also wrote some stuff on the Persian poetry and so on, being in Iran, and also wrote about his Slavic experiences. We're going to look at two stories. The first one is The Two Brothers, and the second one is Prince Slugobyl, or something to that effect. Well, I'm trying to remember the name. The Invisible Knight, anyways. So, if the audio is good, I won't waste your time any further. Once upon a time, there were two brothers whose father had left them but a small fortune. The eldest grew very rich, but at the same time cruel and wicked, whereas there was nowhere a more honest or kinder man than the younger. But he remained poor, and had many children, so that at times they could scarcely get bread to eat. At last, one day, there was not even this in the house, so he went to his rich brother and asked him for a loaf of bread. Waste of time. His rich brother only called him beggar and vagabond, and slammed the door in his face. The poor fellow, after this brutal reception, did not know which way to turn. Hungry, scantily clad, shivering with cold, his legs could scarcely carry him along. He had not the heart to go home with nothing for the children, so he went towards the mountain forest. But all he found there were some wild pears that had fallen to the ground. He had content himself with eating these, though they set his teeth on edge. But what was he to do to warm himself? For the east wind with its chill blast pierced him through and through. "Where shall I go?" he said. "What will become of us in the cottage? There is neither food nor fire, and my brother has driven me from his door." It was just then he remembered having heard that the top of the mountain in front of him was made of crystal, and had a fire forever burning upon it. "I will try to find it," he said, "and then I may be able to warm myself a little." So he went on climbing higher and higher till he reached the top, when he was startled to see 12 strange beings sitting round a huge fire. He stopped for a moment, but then he said to himself, "What have I to lose? Why should I fear? God is with me. Courage!" So he advanced towards the fire, and bowing respectfully, said, "Good people, take pity on my distress. I am very poor. No one cares for me, and I have not even a fire in my cottage. Will you let me warm myself at yours?" They all looked kindly at him, and one of them said, "My son, come sit down with us and warm yourself." This blue text here, by the way, is pictures. We're using a non-picture one because the formatting on these very beautiful pictures with these stories was bonkers. It wasn't working, so there should be a picture of a young man stooping. Oh, I see. Squirm is here. Tricksters getting brutally punished. Hi, Squirm. Natal? Am I saying that right? So he sat down and felt warm directly. He was near them. Felt warm directly. He was near them. But he dared not speak while they were silent. What astonished him most was that they changed seats one after the other, and in such a way that each one passed round the fire and came back to his own place. When he drew near the fire, an old man with a long white beard and bald head arose from the flames and spoke to him thus: "Man, waste not thy life here. Return to thy cottage, work, and live honestly. Take as many embers as thou wilt. We have more than we need." And having said this, he disappeared. Then the 12 filled a large sack with embers, and putting it on the poor man's shoulders, advised him to hasten home. Humbly thanking them, he set off. As he went, he wondered why the embers did not feel hot, and why they should weigh no more than a sack of paper. He was thankful that he should be able to have a fire, but imagine his astonishment that on arriving home, he found the sack to contain as many gold pieces as there had been embers. He almost went out of his mind with joy at the possession of so much money. With all his heart he thanked those who had been so ready to help him in his need. He was now rich and rejoiced to be able to provide for his family. Being curious to find out how many gold pieces there were, and not knowing how to count, he sent his wife to his rich brother for the loan of a quarter measure. A way of weighing. This time the brother was in a better temper, so he lent what was asked of him, but said mockingly, "What can such beggars as you have to measure?" The wife replied, "Our neighbor owes us some wheat. We want to be sure he returns us the right quantity." The rich brother-in-law was puzzled, and suspecting something, he, unknown to his sister-in-law, put some grease inside the measure. The trick succeeded, for on getting it back he found a piece of gold sticking to it. Filled with astonishment, he could only suppose his brother had joined a band of robbers. So he hurried to his brother's cottage and threatened to bring him before the justice of the peace if he did not confess where the gold came from. The poor man was troubled, and dreading to offend his brother, told the story of his journey to the Crystal Mountain. Now the elder brother had plenty of money for himself, yet he was envious of the brother's good fortune and became greatly displeased when he found that his brother's won everyone's esteem by the good use he made of his wealth. At last he determined to visit the Crystal Mountain himself. "I may meet with as good luck as my brother," said he to himself. Upon reaching the Crystal Mountain, he found the 12 seated round the fire as before, and thus addressed them. "I beg of you, good people, to let me warm myself, for it is bitterly cold, and I am poor and homeless." But one of them replied, "My son, the hour of thy birth was favorable. Thou art rich, but a miser. Thou art wicked, for thou hast dared lied to us. Well dost thou deserve thy punishment." Amazed and terrified, he stood silent and not daring to speak. Meanwhile, the 12 changed places, one after the other, and each at last returning to his own seat. Then from the midst of the flames arose the white-bearded old man, and spoke thus sternly to the rich man. "Woe unto the willful! Thy brother is virtuous, therefore I have blessed him. As for thee, thou art wicked, and so shall not escape our vengeance." At these words the 12 arose. The first seized the unfortunate man, struck him, and passed him on to the second. The second also struck him and passed him on to the third, and so did they all in their turn, until he was given up to the old man, who disappeared with him into the fire. Days, weeks, months went by, but the rich man never returned, and none knew what had become of him. I think, between you and me, the younger brother had his suspicions, but he very wisely kept them to himself. That's our first story. Wicked brother getting pulled into the flames. I'm sure there is a lot of history on that imagery. Holly's house says, "Rory looking extra handsome tonight." Well, thank you. We are hiding the ponytail as per usual. The worst feature of my face right now. GS says, "Smart wife." Yeah, I do find that more often than not, the wife is the smart one, if anyone's smart, right? Often, though, no one's smart. And then the wife is usually in those stories just kind of annoying. Round robin beating. Not too sure of that. Score, I remember you, sorry to detract here, I remember you doing that greeting with Joe, and Joe did that greeting back. But I'm not familiar with it. What is the story on it? Okay, The next story that we're going to do is a little longer. It's called The History of Prince Slugobyl. That's right. Why did I forget that name? Or The Invisible Knight. It's going to keep with our theme of tricksters getting terrible punishments. Although I gotta say, I'm on the fence on whose side I'm on in this story. The History of Prince Slugobyl, or The Invisible Knight. It's really more the first one. There once was a king who had an only son called Prince Slugobyl. Now this young prince loved nothing better than traveling. So fond of it was he that when he was 20 years old, he gave his father no rest until he allowed him to go on a long journey. In short, to travel all over the world. Thus he hoped to see beautiful and strange things, to meet with marvelous adventures, to gain happiness, knowledge, and wisdom, and to return a better man in every way than when he left. Fearing his youth and want of experience might lead him astray, his father sent with him a valued and faithful servant. When all was ready, Slugobyl bade the king adieu and set off to visit the land of his dreams. As he was jogging along, allowing his horse to go at its own pace, he saw a beautiful white swan pursued by an eagle about to pounce down upon it. Seizing his crossbow, he took up such a good aim that the eagle fell dead at his feet. The rescued swan stopped in its flight and turning round said to him, "Valiant Prince Slugobyl, it is not a mere swan who thanks you for your most timely help, but the daughter of the Invisible Knight, who to escape the pursuit of the giant Kosti has changed herself into a swan. My father will gladly be of service to you in return for this kindness to me. When in need of his help, you only have to say 3 times, 'Invisible Knight, come to me.'" Having thus spoken, the swan flew away. The prince looked after her for a long time and then continued his journey. He traveled on and on and on, over high mountains, through dark forests, across barren deserts, and so to the middle of a vast plain where every green thing had been burnt up by the rays of the sun. Not a single tree, not even a bush or a plant or any kind was to be seen. No bird was heard to sing, no insect to hum, no breath of air to stir the stillness of this land of desolation. Having ridden for some hours, the prince began to suffer terribly from thirst. So sending his servant in one direction and he himself went in another, in search of some well or spring, they soon found a well full of a cool, fresh water, but unluckily without either rope or bucket to draw it up. After a few moments' thought, the prince said to his servant, "Take the leathern strap used for tethering our horses. Put it round your body, and I will then let you down into the well. I cannot endure this thirst any longer." "Your Highness," answered the servant, "I am heavier than you, and you are not as strong as I. So you will not be able to pull me out of the water. If you therefore will go down first, I shall be able to pull you up when you have quenched your thirst." The prince took his advice, and fastening an end of the strap under his arms, was lowered into the well. When he had enjoyed a deep draught of the clear water, and filled a bottle of the same for his servant, he gave the signal that he wished to be pulled up. But instead of obeying, the servant said, "Listen, Prince. From the day you were born up to the present moment, you have never known anything but luxury." Sorry about that break.
Pleasure and happiness. Well, I have suffered poverty, enslaved all my life. Now we will change places, and you shall be my servant. If you refuse, you'd better make your peace with God, for I shall drown you.
Stop, faithful servant, cried the prince. You will not be so wicked as to do that. What good will it do you? You will never be so happy as you have been with me. And you know what dreadful tortures are in store for murderers in this world? Their hands are plunged into boiling pitch, their shoulders bruised with blows from red-hot iron clubs, and their necks are sawn with wooden saws. You may cut and saw me as much as you like in the other world, said the servant, but I shall drown you in this. And he began to let the strap slide through his fingers. Very well, said the prince. I agree to accept your terms. You shall be the prince, and I will be your servant. I give you my word. I have no faith in words that are carried away by the first wind that blows. Swear to confirm your promise in writing. I swear. The servant then let down a paper and a pencil and dictated the following. I hereby declare that I renounce my name and rights in favor of the bearer of this writing, and that I acknowledge him to be my prince, and that I am his servant. Written in the well, signed Prince Slugobyl. The man, having taken this document, which he was quite unable to read, by the way, drew out the prince, took off the clothes in which he was dressed, and made him wear those he himself had just taken off. Thus disguised, they traveled for a week, and arriving at a large city went straight to the king's palace. There the false prince dismissed his pretended servant to the stables, and presenting himself before the king, addressed him thus in a very haughty manner. King, I have come to demand the hand of your wise and beautiful daughter, whose fame has reached my father's court. In exchange, I offer our alliance, and in case of refusal, war. Prayers and threats are equally out of place, answered the king. Nevertheless, prince, as proof of the esteem in which you hold the king, your father, I grant your request, but only on one condition. That you deliver us from a large army that now besets our town. Do this, and my daughter shall be yours. Certainly, said the impostor. I can soon get rid of them, however near they may be. I undertake by tomorrow morning to have freed the land entirely of them. In the evening he went to the stables, and calling his pretended servant, saluted him respectfully and said, Listen, my dear friend, I want you to go immediately outside the town and destroy the besieging army that surrounds it. But do it in such a way that everyone will believe that I have done it. In exchange for this favor, I promise to return the writing in which you renounced your title of prince and engaged to serve me. So the prince put on his armor, mounted his horse, and rode outside the city gates. There he stopped and called 3 times to the invisible knight. Behold me at your service, said a voice close to him. I will do anything you wish, for you saved my only daughter from the hands of the giant Kosti. I shall always be grateful. Slugobyl showed him the army he had to destroy before morning, and the invisible knight whistled and sang, Magoo, horse with golden mane, I want your help yet once again. Walk not the earth, but fly through space, as lightnings flash or thunders race, swift as the arrow from the bow. Come quick, yet so that none can know. At that instant, a magnificent grey horse appeared out of a whirlwind of smoke, and from his head there hung a golden mane. Swift as the wind was he, flames of fire blazed forth from his nostrils, lightnings flashed from his eyes, and volumes of smoke came from his ears. The invisible knights leapt upon his back, saying to the prince, "Take my sword, and destroy the left wing of the army, while I attack the right wing and the center." The two heroes rushed forward and attacked the invaders with such fury on all sides, men fell like chopped wood or dried grass. A frightful massacre followed, but it was in vain that the enemy fled, for the two knights seemed to be everywhere. Within a short time, only the dead and dying remained on the battlefield, and the two conquerors quietly returned into the town. On reaching the palace steps, the invisible knight melted into the morning mist, and the serving man prince returned to the stables. The same night it happened that the king's daughter, not being able to sleep, had remained on her balcony and seen and heard all that had taken place. She had overheard the conversation between the impostor and the real prince, had seen the latter call to his assistant, the invisible knight, and then doff his royal armor in favor of the false prince. She had seen and understood everything, but she determined to keep silence for a little longer. But when on the next day the king, her father, celebrated the victory of the false prince with great rejoicings, loaded him with honors and presents, and calling his daughter, expressed a wish that she should marry him, the princess could be silent no longer. She walked up to the real prince, who was waiting at a table with the other servants, took his arm, and leading him to the king, said, "Father, and all good people, this is the man who saved our country from the enemy, whom God has destined to be my husband. He to whom pay these honors is but a vile impostor, who has robbed the master of his name and rights. Last night I witnessed such deeds as eyes has never seen, nor ear heard, but which shall be told afterwards. Bid this traitor show the writing which proves the truth of what I say." When the false prince had delivered up the paper signed by the serving man prince, it was found to contain the following words: "The bearer of this document, the false and wicked servant of the serving man prince, shall receive the punishment his sin deserves. Signed, Prince Slugobyl."
"What? Is this the real meaning of that writing?"
asked the traitor, who could not read. "Most assuredly," was the reply. Then he threw himself at the king's feet and begged for mercy, but he received his punishment, for he was tied to the tails of 4 wild horses and torn to pieces. Jesus Christ. I mean, I knew it was coming, but it's still... Prince Slugobyl married the princess. It was a magnificent wedding. I myself was there and drank of the mead and wine, but they only touched my beard and did not enter my mouth. Not too sure where that ending comes from, that very last sentence. So Scorm says, "Oh, Tansy, it's a common Cree greeting." Oh, it technically means hello, how are you? It's the start of a conversation, but it's also used as a passing greeting. Interesting. I see they're catching up to the being torn apart by 4 wild horses. Yeah. Brutal, to say the least. I also noticed that both these stories in the Slavic are very, very, very unrelenting on how they end. All right. Well, that was our second story. I don't know how I got through that one faster. It is longer than the first story, and it took me almost the same amount of time. Which means we're in unknown territory. There was one other story that I was interested in. Oh my god, this book is very long. Let me see. There we go. Finally, back at the contents. Thing is, though, I don't know how long it is. It's called The Story of the Plentiful Tablecloth, the Avenging Wand, the Sash that Becomes a Lake, and the Terrible Helmet. And it's such a great title. I mean, it's drawn and quartered, but that's worse than drawn and quartered. Drawn and quartered involves, like, blades and stuff. That's just straight up tearing a person apart with horses, which is, truthfully, a thing that was done. But Jesus. And to be honest, I'm kind of on this guy's side, because, I mean, screw the prince. He said his life would never be better than when he served him. I think it also gives us good evidence as to why education... Oh man, I could write a whole essay about how education and language, written language, was used to suppress the working class. But that's not what we're here for. This is just story time, not Rory delving into politics. Scorm says, that's not an instant death, right? Like, that's so messy. I will say, basically, there is no such thing as an instant death for the most part. But yeah, I think that's slower than most. I don't know how long this is. I just want to make sure that this is not like 100 pages long or something, because it's at the end of the book. That doesn't look too bad. Okay. Content warning in that I don't know what the content of this is, but this title has drawn my attention in. The Story of the Plentiful Tablecloth, the Avenging Wand, and the Sash that Becomes a Lake, and the Terrible Helmet. Now it once happened that one of the king's herdsmen had 3 sons. 2 of these lads were supposed to be very sharp-witted, while the youngest was thought to be very stupid indeed. The elder sons helped their father to look after the flocks and herds, while the fool, so they called him, was good for nothing but sleeping and amusing himself. Again, I'm on the fool's side. He would pass the whole days and nights slumbering peacefully on the stove, only getting off when forced to by others, or when he was too warm or wished to lie on the other side, or when hungry and thirsty and he wanted food and drink. So he's a cat. His father had no love for him, and called him a ne'er-do-well. His brothers often tormented him by dragging him off the stove and taking away his food. Indeed, he would many a time have gone hungry if his mother had not been good to him and fed him on the quiet. She caressed him fondly, for why should he suffer, thought she, if he does happen to have been born a fool? Besides, who can understand the ways of God? It sometimes happens that the wisest men are not happy, while the foolish, when harmless and gentle, lead contented lives. One day, on their return from the fields, the fool's 2 brothers dragged him off the stove, and taking him into the yard, where they gave him a good sound thrashing, they turned him out of the house, saying, "Go, fool, and lose no time, for you shall have neither food nor lodging until you bring us a basket of mushrooms from the wood." The poor lad was so taken by surprise he hardly understood what his brothers wanted him to do. After pondering for a while, he made his way towards a small oak forest, where everything seemed to have strange and marvelous appearance. So strange, he did not recognize this place. As he walked, he came to a small, dead tree stump. On top of which he placed his cap, saying, "Every tree here raises its head to the skies and wears a good cap of leaves. But you, my poor friend, are bareheaded. You will die of cold. You must be among your brothers, as I am among mine, a born fool. Then take my cap." And throwing his arms round the dead stump, he wept and embraced it tenderly. At that moment, an oak which stood near began to walk towards him as if it were alive. The poor fellow was frightened and about to run away, but the oak spake like a human being and said, "Do not fly. Stop a moment and listen to me. This withered tree is my son, and up to this time no one has grieved for his dead youth but me. You have now watered him with your tears, and in return for your sympathy, you shall henceforward have anything you ask of me on pronouncing these words. O oak tree so green and with acorns of gold, your friendship to prove I will try. In heaven's good name now to beg I'll make bold. My needs then, O kindly supply." At the same moment, a shower of golden acorns fell, and the fool filled his pockets and thanked the oak, and bowing to her, returned home. Her? Oh dear. Well, I've committed now. It's an oak. They all speak like that. Well, stupid, where are the mushrooms?" cried one of his brothers. "I have some mushrooms off the oak in my pockets." "Eat them yourself, then, for you will get nothing else, you good-for-nothing. What have you done with your cap?" "I put it on a poor stump of a tree that stood by the wayside, for its head was uncovered, and I was afraid it might freeze." He then scrambled onto the top of the stove, and as he lay down, some of the golden acorns fell out of his pocket. So bright were they shone like sunbeams in the room. In spite of the fool's entreaties, the brothers picked them up and gave them to their father, who hastened to present them to the king, telling them that his idiot son had gathered them in the wood. The king immediately sent a detachment of his guards to the forest to find the oak which bore golden acorns. But their efforts were fruitless, for though they hunted in every nook and corner of the forest, they could not find a single oak that bore acorns of gold. At first the king was very angry, but when he grew calmer, he sent for his herdsman and said to him, "Tell your son the fool that he must bring me, by this evening, a cask filled to the brim with these precious golden acorns. If he obeys my command, you shall never lack bread and salt, and you may rest assured that my royal favor will not fail you in time of need." The herdsman gave his youngest son the king's message. "The king, I see," he replied, "is fond of a good bargain. He does not ask, he commands, and insists upon a fool fetching him acorns of solid gold in return for promises made of air. No, I shall not go." And neither prayers nor threats were of the slightest avail to make him change his mind. Yeah, that's right. Tell off that stupid king. At last his brothers pulled him forcefully off the stove and put his coat on him and a new cap, and dragged him into the yard, where they gave him another good beating and drove him away, saying, "Now, you stupid, lose no time, be off and be quick. If you return without golden acorns, you shall have neither supper nor bed." What was the poor fellow to do? For a long time he wept, then crossing himself, he went in the direction of the forest. He soon reached the dead stump upon which his cap still rested, and going up to the mother oak, he said to her, "O oak tree so green, with acorns of gold, in my helplessness I to thee cry. In heaven's great name now to beg I make bold, my pressing needs pray satisfy." I like how the tree complimented himself in his summoning phrase, says Score. "My kind of tree. Yeah, you're an oak. Have confidence of an oak." The oak moved and shook its branches, but instead of golden acorns, a tablecloth fell into the fool's hands. And the tree said, "Keep this cloth in your possession.
and for your own use. When you want benefit of it, you need only say, O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer. May he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear.
When it had uttered these words, the oak ceased to speak, and the fool, thanking her, bowed and turned towards home. On his way he wondered to himself how he should tell his brothers and what they would say, but above all he thought of how his good mother would rejoice to see the feast-giving tablecloth. And when he had walked about half the distance, he met an old beggar who said to him,
See what a sick and ragged old man I am. For the love of God, give me a little money or some bread.
The fool spread his tablecloth on the grass, and inviting the beggar to sit down, and said, O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer. May he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear. Then a whistling was heard in the air, and overheard something shone brightly overhead. At the same instant, a table spread as for a royal banquet, oh my God, appeared before them. Upon it were many different kinds of food, flasks of mead, and glasses of the choicest wine. The plates were of gold and silver. The fool and the beggar man crossed themselves and began to feast, and when they had finished whistling, the whistling was again heard, and everything vanished. The fool folded up his tablecloth and went on his way, but the old man said, If you will give me your tablecloth, you shall have this wand in exchange. When you say certain words to it, it will set upon the person or persons pointed out, and give them such a thrashing, that to get rid of that, they will have to give you anything they possess. The fool thought of his brothers and exchanged the tablecloth for the wand. Yeah, come on, fool. After which they both went on their respective ways. Suddenly the fool remembered that the oak had ordered him to keep the tablecloth for his own use, and that by parting with it he had lost the power of giving his mother an agreeable surprise. So he said to the wand, Thou self-propelling, ever-willing fighting wand, run quick and bring my feast-providing tablecloth back to my hand. Thy praise I'll sing. The wand went off like an arrow after the old man, quickly overtook him and threw itself upon him and began to beat him dreadfully, crying out in a loud voice, For others' goods you seem to have a liking. Stop, thief, or sure your back will keep on striking. The poor beggar tried to run away, but it was of no use, for the wand followed him, striking him all the time and repeating the same words over and over again. So in spite of his anxiety to keep the tablecloth, he was forced to throw it away and flee. The wand brought the cloth back to the fool, who again went on his way towards home, thinking of the surprise in store for his mother and brothers. He had not gone very far when a traveler carrying an empty wallet accosted him, saying, For the love of God, give me a small coin or a morsel of food, for my bag is empty and I am very hungry. I have too a long journey before me. The fool again spread his tablecloth on the grass and said, O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer, may he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear. A whistling was heard in the air. Something shone brightly overhead, and a table spread as for a royal feast placed itself before them. It was laid with a numerous variety of dishes, hydromel, and costly wine. The fool and his guests sat down, crossed themselves, and ate to their heart's content. The fool's eating again? When they had finished, whistling was again heard, and everything vanished. The fool folded the cloth up carefully and was about to continue his journey when the traveler said, Will you exchange your tablecloth for my waistband? When you say to it certain words, it will turn into a deep lake upon which you may float at will. The words run thus, O marvelous, wonderful lake-forming band, for my safety and not for my fun,
Bear me in a boat on thy waves far from land, so that I from my foes need not run.
The fool thought his father would find it very convenient always to have water at hand for the king's flocks. So he gave his tablecloth in exchange for the belt, which he wound round his loins. Taking the wand in his hand, he went off in the opposite direction. After a little while, the fool began to reflect on what the oak had told him about keeping the tablecloth for his own use, and he remembered too that he was depriving himself of the power of giving his mother a pleasant surprise. Thereupon he said the magic words to the wand. Thou self-propelling, ever-willing fighting wand, run quick and bring my feast-providing tablecloth back to my hand. Thy praise I'll sing. The wand at once started in pursuit of the poor traveler, whom it began to beat, at the same time crying out, For others' good you seem to have a liking. Stop thee, for sure your back I'll keep on striking. The man, who was scared out of his wits, tried to escape the wand's blows, but it was of no use. So he was forced to throw the tablecloth away and run at the top of his speed. The wand brought the tablecloth back to his master. The latter hid it under his coat and rearranged the waistband, and taking the faithful wand in his hand, again went towards home. As he walked, he rejoiced to think of the pleasure he should have in exercising the wand on his wicked brothers, of his father's satisfaction, won by the help of the waistband. He could always have water for the king's flock, even in the driest weather, and of his mother's joy on witnessing the wonders of the feast-giving tablecloth. These pleasant thoughts were interrupted by a soldier, lame, clothed in rags, and covered with wounds. He had once been a famous warrior. I am pursued by misfortunes, said he to the fool. I was once a brave soldier, and fought valiantly in my youth. Now I am lamed for life. And on this lonely road I have found no one to give me a morsel of food. Have pity on me, and give me a little bread. The fool sat down on the grass, and spread out his tablecloth, and said, O tablecloth, who for the poor, the hungry, and thirsty makes cheer, may he who begs from door to door feed off you without stint or fear. A whistling was heard in the air, something bright shone overhead, and then before them stood a table, spread as for a royal feast, loaded with dainty dishes, mead, and costly wine. When they had eaten and drunk as much as they wanted, the whistling was again heard, and then everything vanished. The fool was folding up his tablecloth when the soldier said, Will you give your tablecloth in exchange for this six-horned helmet? It will fire itself off and instantly destroy the object pointed out. You have but to turn it round on your head and repeat these words. O magic helmet, never thou dost want for powder nor shot. Allay my fears and fire now, just where I point, fail not. You will see that it fires off immediately. Even if your enemy were a mile away, he would fall. The fool was delighted with the idea, and thought how useful such a hat would be in any such danger. It would even serve him to defend his country, the king, or himself. So he handed the tablecloth to the soldier and put the helmet on his head, took his wand in his hand, and again set his face towards home. Scorm says this guy ate 3 full meals. Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was thinking, Scorm. He doesn't have to eat every time. When he had gone some distance, the soldier was almost out of sight. He began to think of what the oak said about not parting with the tablecloth, and how his dear mother, I don't think this person is the hero of this story, just putting it out there, could not now enjoy the pleasant surprise he'd been dreaming about. So he said to the wand, Thou self-propelling, ever-willing fighting wand, run quick and bring my feast-providing tablecloth back to my hand. Thy praise I'll sing. The wand dashed after the soldier. Having reached him, began to beat him and cry out, For others' good you seem to have a liking. Stop, thief, for sure your back I'll keep on striking. The soldier was still a powerful man, and in spite of his wound, turned right about face, intending to give blow for blow, but the wand was too much for him, and he soon found resistance useless. So overcome by pain rather than fear, he threw away the tablecloth and took to his heels. The faithful wand brought the tablecloth back to his master, who, glad to have it again, once more turned towards home. Scorm says the DM of this world gives out magic items like crazy. Holy. No kidding. He soon left the forest, crossed the fields, and came in sight of his father's house. At a little distance therefrom his brothers met him, and said crossly, "Well, stupid, where are the golden acorns?" What a great greeting. I'm gonna greet some people that way. The fool looked at them and laughed in their faces. Then he said to his wand, "O self-propelling, ever-willing fighting wand, strike with thy usual fire my ever-scolding, teasing, worrying brother band, for they have roused my ire." The wand needed no second bidding. Darting out of his hand, began to thrash his brother soundly, crying out like a reasoning creature, "Your brother has often your blows felt, alack! Now taste it yourselves, hope you like it, whack, whack." The brothers were overpowered, and felt all the while as if boiling water were being poured over their heads. What? Yelling with pain, they began to run at full speed, and soon disappeared with clouds of dust flying round them. The wand then came back to the fool's hand. He went into the house, climbed on the stove, and told his mother all that happened. Then he cried, "O tablecloth, for the poor, the hungry and thirsty makes cheer, let us within your cottage door feed off you without stint or fear." A whistling was heard in the air, and something bright shone overhead. Then a table laid as for a royal banquet was placed before them, covered with dainty meats, glasses, and bottles of mead and wine. Is he gonna eat a goddamn fourth meal? The whole service was of gold and silver. As the fool and his mother were about to begin the feast, the herdsman entered. Oh, thank God. He stopped, dumb with amazement, and when invited to partake, began to eat and drink with great enjoyment. At the end of the meal, the whistling was again heard, and everything vanished completely. What really stands out for me is there's no dishes to do. That's why I want this thing. The herdsman set off in a haste to the court to tell the king of his new marvel. Man, just don't tell the king. Thereupon his majesty sent one of his heroes in search of the fool, whom he found stretched out on the stove. "If you value your life, listen and obey the king's orders," said the paladin. "He commands you to send him by me your tablecloth, then you shall have your share of his royal favor. But if not, you will always remain a poor fool, and will, moreover, be treated as a refractory prisoner. We teach them how to behave. You understand?" "Oh yes, I understand." And then he pronounced the magic words. "O self-propelling, ever-willing fighting wand, go soundly thrash that man, the most deceiving, dangerous wretch in all the land, so hurt him all you can." The wand sprang from the fool's hand with the speed of lightning and struck the paladin 3 times in the face. He immediately fled, but the wand was after him and hitting him all the time and crying out, "Mere promises are children's play, so do not throw your breath away. But think of something true to say, you rogue, when you come our way." Defeated and filled with consternation, the paladin returned to the king and told him about the wand and how badly he'd been beaten. When the king heard that the fool possessed a wand that struck of itself, he wanted it so much that for a time he forgot all about the tablecloth, and sent some of his soldiers with orders to bring back the wand. When they entered the cottage, the fool, as usual, was lying on the stove. "Deliver up the wand to us instantly," said they. "The king is willing to pay any price you ask, but if you refuse, he will take it from you by force." Instead of replying, the fool unwound the waistband, saying to it as he did so, "O marvelous, wonderful lake, forming band, for my safety and not for my fun, bear me in a boat on thy waves far from land, so that I from my foes need not run." There was a shimmering in the air, and while at the same moment everything around them disappeared, and a beautiful lake, long, wide, and deep, was seen, surrounded by green fields, fish with golden scales, and eyes of pearls played in the clear water. In the center, in a small silver skiff, rode a man, whom the soldiers recognized as the Fool. They remained some time looking at this miracle, then ran off to tell the king. Now, when the king heard thereof, he was so anxious to possess the lake, or rather the waistband that produced the lake, that he sent a whole battalion of soldiers to take the Fool prisoner. This time they managed to get a hold of him while he was asleep, but as they were about to tie his hands, he turned his hat around and said, "O magic helmet, never thou dost want for powder nor shot. Allay my fears and fire now, from just where I point fail not." Instantly 100 bullets whizzed through the air, amid clouds of smoke and loud report. Many of the soldiers fell dead. Jesus Christ. Others took refuge in the wood, whence they returned to the king to give an account of what had taken place. Whereupon the king flew into a violent rage, furious that he had as yet failed to take the Fool. But his wish to possess the feast-giving tablecloth, the magic wand, the lake-forming sash, and above all, the helmet with 24 horns was stronger than ever. Having reflected for some days on the best way and means to attain his object, he resolved to try the effect of kindness, and sent for the Fool's mother. "Tell your son the Fool," said his majesty to the woman, "that my charming daughter and I send greeting, and that we shall consider it an honor if he will come here and show us the marvelous things he possesses. Should he feel inclined to make me a present of them, I will give half my kingdom, and I will make him my heir. You may also say that the princess, my daughter, will choose him for her husband." Scorm says, I know this is a crude detail to point out, but that Fool has a massive dump in his immediate future from all the rich meats, mead, and wine? Nah. The good woman hastened home to her son, whom she advised to accept the king's invitation and show him his treasures. The Fool wound his waistband round his loins, put the helmet on his head, and hid the tablecloth in his breast, and took his magic wand in his hand and started off to go to court. The king was not there on his arrival, but he was received by the paladin, who saluted him courteously. Music played and the troops did him military honors. In fact, he was treated far better than he'd expected. On being presented to the king, he took off his helmet and, bowing low, said, "O king, I am come to lay at the foot of your throne my tablecloth, waistband, wand, and helmet. In return for these gifts, I beg that your favor may be shown to the most humble of your subjects." "Tell me then, Fool, what price you want for these goods?" "Not money, sire. A fool of my sort cares very little about money. Has not the king promised my mother he will give me in exchange the half of his kingdom and the hand of his daughter in marriage? These are the gifts I claim." After these words, the paladin was filled with envy at the good fortune of the Fool, and made a sign for the guards to enter. The soldiers seized the poor fellow and dragged him out into the courtyard, and they killed him treacherously to the sound of drums and trumpets, after which they covered him over with earth. Now it happened that when the soldiers stabbed him, his blood spurted out, and some of the drops fell beneath the princess's window. The maiden wept bitterly at the sight, watering the blood-stained ground with her tears. And lo, marvelous to relate, an apple tree grew out of the blood-sprinkled earth, and it grew so rapidly that its branches soon touched the windows of her rooms. By noon it was covered in blossom, while at eventide ripe red apples hung thereon. As the prince was admiring them, she noticed that one of the apples trembled, and when she touched it, it fell into the bosom of her dress. This took her fancy, and she held it in her hand. Meanwhile, the sun had set, the night had fallen, and everyone in the palace was asleep, except the guard, the paladin, and the princess. The guard, sword in hand, patrolled up and down, for it was his duty. The princess toyed with her pretty little apple, and could not sleep. The paladin who had gone to bed was aroused by a sound that made his blood run cold, for the Avenging wand stood up before him and began to beat him soundly. Although he rushed from the room trying to escape from it, or followed him crying out, "False paladin, you worthless man! Do not so envious be. Why act unjustly when you can both just and honest be? For others' goods, why have you such a liking? You rogue, you thief, be sure I'll keep on striking." The unhappy man wept and cried for mercy, but the wand still continued to strike. The princess was distressed. I will say this has taken quite the turn. Was distressed on hearing these cries of distress. And she watered her much-cherished apple tree with her tears. And strange to tell, the apple grew and changed its shape, thus continuing to change. It suddenly turned into a handsome young man, even the very same who'd been killed that morning. "Lovely princess, I salute you," said the fool. "The cunning of the paladin caused my death, but with your tears you've restored me to life. Your father promised to give you to me. Are you willing?" Okay. I mean, why not? "If such be the king's wish, I consent," replied she, as she gave him her hand with a tender look. As he spoke, the door opened, admitting the helmet which placed itself upon his head, the sash which wound itself around his waist, the tablecloth which hid itself in one of his pockets, and the avenging wand which placed itself in his hand. Then came the king, all out of breath and wondering what the noise was about. He was amazed to see the fool alive again, and even more so that he should be with the princess. The young fellow, fearing for the king's wrath, cried out, "O marvelous, wonderful, lake-forming band, for my safety and not for my fun, bear us on in a boat on thy waves far from land, so that we from our foes need not run." There was a shimmering in the air, and then everything disappeared, while on the lawn before the palace stretched a wide, deep lake, in the crystal water of which swam little fish with eyes of pearl and scales of gold. Far away rode the princess and the fool in a silver skiff. The king stood on the shores of the lake and signed to them to return. When they had landed, they knelt at his feet and avowed their mutual love, upon which his majesty bestowed his blessing. The lake disappeared. They again found themselves in the prince's apartments. The king called a special meeting of his council, at which he explained how things had turned out. That he made the fool his heir and betrothed him to his daughter, and had put the paladin in prison. The fool gave the king his magic treasures and told him what words to say in each case. Next day all their wishes were fulfilled. The fool of the family was married to the princess and at the same time received half the kingdom, with the promise of succession to the throne and the wedding feast to which all the rich and noble of the land were invited. Exceeded in its magnificence and splendor any other festival ever seen or heard of. Good Lord, was that insane. To be clear, if it wasn't clear at the beginning, I have not read this one before. It's at the very end of the book, and I was like, well, I honestly thought we'd make a more time on that other story, but my God. So he's nice to a tree stump, makes friends with an oak, drops golden acorns, who his dad for some reason decides to show to the king. Dad's the real problem here. King wants more. The fool goes and talks to the oak. The oak says, those are just promises. Let me give you a tablecloth. He then eats a meal every time and uses a wand that he traded it for to just beat the hell out of people that he made a fair trade with and steal stuff back, which somehow is good. I don't know how. I don't understand the morality of that. Like, even within the binds of the story, not in line with my own. beats up a war veteran, by the way, at one point, and steals his weapon. Then he goes and beats... Okay, so then the king was greedy and sends all these troops his way in this paladin, and he beats the hell out of them. Then he goes to the king and offers up the only things he has that really ensures he's a threat or interesting. And the king, for some reason, keeps his word. Sort of. But the paladin comes and kills him, and his blood and the woman's tears turns him into an apple tree, which grows in one day. She then fondles an apple. If I read that correctly, it fell into her bosom and she liked it, and then fondles and plays with this pretty apple. And then somehow that turns the tree, or the apples, turns into him, who he then uses all this magic stuff, just like an Iron Man outfit, comes latching back on him for no obvious reason. And then he's in the middle of a lake on a silver skiff, at which point the king not only decides to honor the agreement, but upon receiving all this stuff, doesn't go back on it, which I honestly thought he would. Well, let's see what chat says about this. I know we're like done here, but that was nuts. Scorm, your father promised you to me. Are you willing? Rory rubs face in disgust. I know. What is with folklore and like, do you love me? Who are you? I'm the son of somebody. And you're like, oh yes, absolutely. I've seen your eyes and I can see you're trustworthy. And it would be one thing if it was just one story, but it's all the stories are like this. GS says that story was as complicated as the title. It definitely paid in that, like the title, it followed through on the promise of that title. It was definitely about those things. Scorm says that was insanity. Yeah, the fool is a bad guy. Yeah, I don't see how he isn't the bad guy. He's not a good person anyways. This is a fever dream, he says. Yes, well, I guess on that fever dream, I don't think this was a chill stream. I think I have offended my chill stream aesthetic. But my god, that was nuts. That was one of the nuttiest tales I think I've ever told on this show. I have never been so impossible. I've never found it so impossible to predict where a story's going. Just to give you a little context, when you're a writer, you start to get this sense for where a story's going to go or what's going to happen in the end. Like, there's very few stories left that surprise you because there are little features that go along in books and movies and stuff that you're like, well, they wouldn't be emphasizing that as a writer unless it was important later. And you get to the point where nothing really surprises you. And I think one of the things that I like about fairy tales is they are very unpredictable because they don't follow any rules, implied or otherwise, about writing and narratives. But my god, at no point did I know what the next major thing was going to be in that story. I did not expect the fool to send the wand out to beat the guy up and then face no consequences for that. It was nuts. Food for thought, says GS. Lots of food. Oh my god, so much food. Alright, well, rather than have me babble for the rest of the night, thank you so much for everybody who has come by and listened to this insane tale. I guess that one was the opposite. The theme of the night was tricksters getting their just rewards. This was kind of the opposite, where a person who tricked everyone was the hero. So there we go. That's how I tied it into the theme. Don't forget to check out the channel if you like this stuff. Like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Varietal_lit. Don't eat 4 full-size banquet tables of food a day. And always beware the paladins. They are the ones that are the most dangerous generally. Thank you so much, Scorm. Thank you, GS. And thank you all you lurkers who aren't in the chat. It's always wonderful to see you. Get a good sleep. I'll keep the fire going in the cabin.